Hey guys, so today we're going to learn a bit about Trpc. This is not a full step-by-step tutorial, rather it's just like a project demonstration so you can know about this new tool, how you can implement it, have a guidance for you to use it to know if it fits your needs. Let's start off what is Trpc, and I'm here on their website. So it's not like a server or framework. It's not really like like Express or Next.js. It's more like a procedural tool to generate full stack APIs to communicate between the APIs. So it's more like a protocol that relies in TypeScript. So you can think this as in a similar way that you would think for GraphQL. So it kind of tries to solve one of the problems that GraphQL solves, and you can also think on this as a replacement for REST APIs. So instead of using a REST APIs, you want to use Trpc. And yeah, and what makes this tool great is, well, first of all, it's made mainly for TypeScript code base, so you cannot use this in other languages. And what you get by sacrificing that is that you're able to have fully documented and fully type safety APIs across your stack. So that's the main selling point. What this means is if you're defining what you want to receive from the server, you're going to know exactly what are the things that you're able to fetch. You know also what the parameters to send. So if in case you send a wrong parameter, you're going to know right in the code. And it's different from, you can also do this kind of thing with GraphQL, but the difference here is that there's not like any extra layer. The type safety is built into this ecosystem. So you don't have to generate types or anything like that. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's just TypeScript that's shared between the server and the client. So it's really simple to do things in a safe way and really quickly without too much setup. So what I wanted to showcase is this project that I have here. And it's just an example, a real world example that I put so you can see how you can use it, how you can structure your project around this tool, and some examples. So the ideal setup for the RPC project is ideally to have it in one project, in one monorepo. That doesn't mean that you're going to deploy everything to one place. It just means that the repo itself is ideally you will have it in one place. So you will have the client and the servers in one repository, and the benefit of that is that you can easily import and share the code between both sides. That's the ideal thing. I haven't tried in like a multi-repo setup. I would think it's possible, but it's going to be more difficult. So in this project, we have like different folders for all of the components that we have in this part. So we have one folder for the server, one folder for the client, and one folder for some shared utilities between these parts. So this is just plain folder structure with no fancy tools like Turbo Repo. There's several tools that you could have, so it's easier to deploy and structure a monorepo. But this is just a plain monorepo without any fancy tools. So just for demonstration purpose. And in the root of the project, we have some scripts, so we can run and develop this project in one simple step. So we have a dev script that's going to run the client and the server. And for each of these, we have scripts that are going to run these projects for us. So let me just run the project and we can see what's going on here. So I can just npm run dev, and it's going to start these both servers. And if I open here, I have my application. So my application is a really simple one. It's just like a crude operations application. And the idea is that you will have like different tags for the different. It's just like a tutorial tracker. So let's say you want to start a tutorial, so you can enter an URL, and you can set it if it's completed or you want to watch it later. So it's going to be there. Yeah, it's a pretty basic crude application, but it's kind of close to being like a real world example. And let's start by looking at the server. So the server is an Express application, and this is one thing that I mentioned, is that this is not like a server framework. It's just a tool for communication, so you can have any server that you want. In this case, I'm using Express because it's really known. It's one of the most popular ones. You can also use Next.js or any server you want. So we're just starting a new server like you will normally use. We have a database that we're going to connect. For this, I'm using type ORM. It's just an ORM to connect to the database and have like all the queries in code. And here we can start to see some things different that that you will have in a normal API. So in the normal API, you will just have like a router for each endpoint, and these are REST endpoints. And for this one, we also have routers, but these are derived from TRPC. So they call them routers, and at the end of the day, it's just a collection of methods, of functions that you can call from your client to interact with your server. So it does not need to be like endpoints, but they're going to resemble endpoints at the end of the day, because you're going to create, you're going to get things from the server, you're going to update, you're going to delete, but these are just functions. So we have this one router for now. Let's go tutorial, and we're going to take a look at what's inside this later. For now, we're just going to see what else we have here, and we are exporting the types of this router. So this is what I mentioned, it's great to have it in one project, because this is the thing that you're going to import from the client to have all these magic types shared without code generation. And one thing that I forgot to mention is where this T is coming from, and it's just like a setup that I have here for TRPC, and all of this is in the documentation, and this is just like a setup that we have. So we are creating a context. So what is a context? It's just a way to share information between all your calls, your procedures, and you can share things like, like the headers. You will have things like the headers of the request. You could also add new things like authentication info that you can share across all of your calls. It's just like a regular server context. You're defining that context, you're exporting the context, and you also initializing the TRPC routers with the context and all of that. And this is what we are exporting, and this is just like the TRPC instance where we are going to have all of our functions and endpoints. And here we are having this like a middleware. So for this, because TRPC can work with any framework, we have like an adapter, and this comes right into their package. So if we can see here, we have that's coming from TRPC server. So TRPC server is what we need for this to work in the server. And we have different adapters, and we have the one that's for Express, and this is acting like a middleware for Express, where we can have our routers and our context, and it's going to handle all of our requests. So it's just, at the end of the day, it's just one single endpoint. Well, this endpoint is going to be different for different cases, but you define just like one traditional endpoint, and is this one that's called TRPC in this case. And you pass what the rest of the things that you need for this adapter. When you pass the router, we have just one route, but it could be anything. And this is just if you want to serve this into production, and when you connect to the database and you want to listen to the port, it's just basic stuff for Express, nothing different here. The difference is that we have a router and we have our TRPC input or single endpoint. So let's take a look at what's going on in this router. And well, let's also take a look at the structure of this server. We have entities that are like what you have for the type or ORM system is just a way to define a SQL schema. So you will have like the name of this table, you have the column and the properties. So this is an ID that's number, that's auto-generated. We have a YouTube URL, we have a title, we have some progress, this is a number. And yeah, it's just a way to define an object with all the properties for the SQL table. And here I'm sharing this tutorial interface, and this comes from the leaf folder, where we can, well, in this project, I'm sharing things between the server and the backend. You can have it in a different way. We have the data source, where we are it's like the database that we are using for this project. It's just SQLite for now. And here we have the routes. So this is what is coming from referencing here is the tutorial router that comes from routes tutorial. And here is where all of the logic or the business logic of the application is happening. Now you will obviously have it in different abstractions if you want. You might not want to have it all of the logic directly into the functions directly, but this is just an example. And one other thing that we're using here is this SOD library. And what SOD allows you is to have an schema that you can validate. And because we're using TRPC, that's where also the types come from for the request. So we define like what we need, for example, create a new tutorial. So we are just saying it's going to be an object that has a YouTube URL, which is a string, and so on and so on. So in this case, the status is an enum. It's just defining a schema, and this schema is what's going to produce these types for us. So we're going to see how we can use this schema in the front end, which is going to come really handy. And here is the tutorial, the router itself. So we grab the instance of the tutorial object, the TRPC instance, and we define a router with this method. So here we are going to have a list of functions. Yeah, these are just functions, and it can be anything that you want, and it can have any name that you want. This is some names that I came to that resemble what this is doing. For example, this is a tutorial, right? So it's going to list all of the tutorials. And for this, we're using the trpc instance. We have a procedure, so it could be a query. For this, in this case, it's going to be a query. We don't have any input for this, so we're just going to have this function that does not have arguments. It's like a plain function without arguments and returns all of our tutorials. So we're grabbing this tutorial repository that comes from the tutorial entity, and this is just from the ORM. And here it has a method to find all of the tutorials, and it's going to give me an array of tutorials. So it's just that, and I don't have to define the return value of this. It's just going to be predefined for us, and that's why I use type ORM. It's because we can say what type is this, and it knows what to return. And for example, in this case, it knows it's a promise with a bunch of tutorials. So yeah, that's great. We didn't have to define anything. It's just a function, and now this function is going to have all the things that we need. So here we have this get by status function. So it's going to look into the logic itself is going to look into this repository where the status is the input of the status. And in this case, we do have an input. So in this case, you can see that we didn't have any input. But in this case, we do, and we can define that with input. And we can say it's a sort object. So it's just an object that receives a status, and it's going to be one of these. So it's going to be completed, in progress, or watch later. And these are just TypeScript types. We can go, and this is also in the library. It's just an enum that comes from this const declaration, and this is just TypeScript. So now that we know the input, we can use this to query. And if I look into the request, you can see that I have my input here, and you can know exactly what is the properties that we expect because we defined that here. So here we have the status, and we know exactly what this is. So we have all the types that we need. And here, because this node that requires this because of the schema, it's going to match. So we didn't have to do anything. So for example, if I write something here like foo or something like that, it's going to throw an error because this is not what we need for this to query the status. So we're just having all of the type definitions for free in these applications. So how is this used in the front end? So if I go to the client folder and I'm going here, well, let's go quickly through the front end. So we have like all the trpc dependencies. We're using React, by the way. You can use other libraries. I just find easier to use React for this. So we have trpc server as a peer dependency. It's actually not bundled into the React code. It's just a peer dependency that you need for auto-completion. And you also have this trpc React query library. That's a wrapper for React query, which is a popular React fetching library. And we also have the trpc client and the React query library itself. So this is the library that's going to do all the fetching for us. If we go to the source, we have our trpc URL. And here is the endpoint, the single endpoint that I mentioned before. We have a client for making the queries, and this is just from trpc, from React query. This is not a trpc thing, but because we're using React query, we need to define this. And here we have our client. So this is going to use the trpc instance. So we also need a trpc instance. So if we look here into this utils folder, we can see how these types are going to be shared. So we are importing the React trpc, create React trpc from React query trpc. We have our app router. So this is what we were exporting from the server. So that's how it knows what is the server. So this is what we are importing here. So that's why it needs to be in the same folder, in the same project. Well, it's easier that way. And then we have our trpc instance that has this router, and it's going to have all of our types that we need to communicate with the backend. So if we go back to this main, we are using that instance, we're creating the client, and we are having like our set of links that for communication. So in this case, we only have one, and it's using our trpc URL. So in production, of course, they're going to change this to a different thing. So you might want to store this in a env variable or something like that. And besides that, you also need to wrapper this trpc provider that has the client, and you also want to wrap the client provider that has the query client that's from React query. So you wrap with the provider for trpc, you pass the client and the query client, and you also want to have this query client inside your app. So this app has only one page, and that's like the dashboard. And here we have like the layout of this page. It's just a bunch of tabs at the top. We have different status, and for this status, which are, you know, you see that before, we have completed, we have in progress, we have watch later. So we have them in like a tab here, and these tabs is what they are using. So what we have for communication with the, when we are fetching data, this is where we are fetching the data. So these tabs is just rendering the values that we need for each of the tutorials depending of the status. So this is where we have our functions. So we first need to access this tutorial object that we have here. We can see that we have different things here, but we can just access this tutorial entity. And inside here, we can see we have different methods. So which method we want here? We want the get by status. This is the one that we talked before. And you can see that everything's auto-completed. So that's great, because if I make a typo, it's going to throw me an error, which is great. And also it knows what I need to pass it. So now I have an error because I'm not sending any parameters. We need a parameter. If we do command click, we actually can just go right into the source of this function, which is great because you easily know what this is doing. And that's one of the great things about this, that you can easily browse your code and see what's going on there. Just by control click, you go there, which is amazing for me. And then you can see here that we need an input, and this input needs to have this key, status of completed, in progress, and watch later. So here I'm going to do just that. So I'm going to pass this status. Oh, so we have this, and I think we have to have another function here. That's the use query function. So that's from React query, and this is what is actually going to make the call. And here we can pass the arguments. So we can see that we need to pass this status completed, in progress, and watch later. So here we can have this status, and here we need to pass these kind of functions, and we know this tab has this information. So we just pass the tab, and it's going to work just like before. And this is how we have fully type safety across all of this stack, and it can save you a lot of bugs, because now if you type something different, you're going to see it right there, and it's directly connected to your backend. So it's just like having completely types for the front end and the backend, so you know exactly what you're getting from the backend, and you know how to interact with it. And you will have this, in this case, you have this data. So you know, and now this data is also typed, because you can see that it's using our tutorial interface. So you know now that if we access this data, we can map it, because we know it's an array. So we are going to have a tutorial, and we can see the properties of this tutorial right away, and all of these types are available to us. So what I'm doing here, I'm just displaying this in a tutorial card, and I'm sending this tutorial. So it's using this shared interface that I have defined before, that I'm sharing between the backend and the frontend. And now I can just interact with that data. And here I can show you a different way to interact with your data. So we are querying, but we can just also do mutations to our data. So if I go here to Trpc, so I have a patch and a delete mutation. And what this is doing is just, for example, for this tutorial, I can just set it as completed. And you can see that now it's in the completed. So it's doing an update into this tutorial. So how this is happening? So we have this patch mutation. And well, I am debouncing this patch mutation, so in case the user clicks that too much, we can debounce it. But what this is doing is just sending a payload, and this payload comes from the properties that we want to update. So right here we can see that we have also auto completion for what we need to send to what we can set to our backend. So we need to send the ID, and we need to send the progress of this tutorial, in this case, if the progress is changing. So for this one is the status. So if the status changes, we are going to update this tutorial using this mutation function, and we're sending the ID. And the ID is mandatory, it's not optional, and the status, which is not mandatory, and we know exactly what we need to send. So yeah, it's also using the tutorial entity that we defined in the backend, which is this one. And it's also using this patch function, and where this patch function is defined is also here. We can just right click into it. We have a schema for this. I have added this schema. So in this case, we have the ID, and what we can update from this is just the progress and the status. So these are optional, and the ID is not optional. So that's how we define the schema. So once we have that schema, we are going just to have like this update object, and we are going to send it to or repository update. So this is just another property for the ORM, and we can see here what this expects. So it's just the tutorial and properties partially, and it's fully, it matches what we are sending. So if we go back to the client, you can see that now upon of that we are using this use mutation function, and this is from React Query, which allows us to make this mutation to the client, and this becomes this function that we are debouncing. We are debouncing here, and we are sending the properties when the status is changing. And that's how we have type safety in these mutations. So another thing that we're doing, and this is not a Trpc thing, this is a React Query thing, but it's nice that we can have it with type safety, is that once this is in success, we have this callback object that we pass to this use mutation. Once this has success, the patch mutation, we can invalidate this query. And this is also coming right from our router. And we know exactly what we can invalidate. If we click here, we can see exactly all of the properties that we can invalidate. So we want to invalidate this get by status query. And we have a function for that, that's invalidate. What else we have here? We just have also a delete mutation. So if you go here, you can also delete this. It's going to be gone. And it's the same thing. The only difference is that this delete mutation is calling this function from the backend, this delete function. It expects just the ID, and then it's going to delete that based on this input from the repository. And this is happening when the user clicks this button. And we can send here what we need here. So again, if we do something wrong, it's going to warn us. So yeah, this is basically all the things that I wanted to share. So you could have like a better idea of what this technology is and how you can use it in your code. I find it's really nice. If you are starting a new project, you can start with this, and it's going to be great because you don't have to. You will have easily know what's in the backend and in the front end. So it's just self-documentation in the code. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else here. It's just all the functions that we already explored. Well, we didn't see the creation function, but it's basically the same. We're just having this create schema, and it's going to save that into our database, and it's also going to be type safe. So yeah, I'm going to link this project into the description so you can take a look and see what's there. If you have any suggestions, you can do it. But yeah, thank you so much for watching.